All right, here's how it starts. It starts with a mad scientist. A mad scientist who looks just like Val Kilmer. Because you know what? Oh my God, it's Val Kilmer. There's Val Kilmer, and he is a mad scientist. Also, there are a bunch of people in a steam room. Now, handily, for the purposes of this movie, they are all very handsome people in the steam room, and they're very sweaty, and they're wearing almost nothing, and they're lit in this sort of very attractive, summery kind of way. They also smolder at each other when they need to. The mad scientist, turns out, he has taken those 6 people in the steam room, and he is holding them hostage in the steam room. He is making the steam room hotter and hotter and hotter, and he says he's going to keep making it hotter and hotter and hotter unless the newspaper publishes his crazed, deranged, mad scientist, insane theory.
Why are you here?
Hundreds of millions of people are going to die. That's a fact.
Hundreds of millions of people will die. How?
Global warming.
That's his insane theory. Global warming. See, he's insane. And he's going to kill those very attractive, sweaty people in the steam room in order to get his deranged way of publicizing his crazy theory, but not before somebody has to rip off their bikini top. The executive producer of that spectacular achievement in bathing-suited American cinema has now just learned that he just got a very, very fancy new job. I should also mention the executive producer of the steam room thing is also the producer of a new film that just came out this year, which celebrates the oldest guy from the Duck Dynasty TV show. It celebrates him as literally, I kid you not, a living prophet here on Earth. It's called The Torchbearer, and he, the guy with the beard, he is the torchbearer. Mr. Robertson may look like a guy who sells duck calls, but this documentary basically proves that God has sent him here to show us on Earth the light and the truth and the way. He speaks for Jesus. I highly recommend that you watch the video trailer for the Val Kilmer steam experiment, global warming is only for mad scientists thing. I do highly recommend that you watch that trailer. At the same time, I highly recommend that you do not watch the trailer for the Phil Robertson as a living religious prophet thing, because if you're tempted to look it up, I'm not going to stop you. But I got to tell you, even just in the 2-minute trailer for the Duck Dynasty guy for that movie, there is a lot of killing. And I don't even mean stylized killing. They show people being beheaded. There's a ton of Nazi footage. There are multiple real executions shown just in the trailer, including somebody being run over and crushed to death by a tank. So, unless that's your sort of thing, you probably do not want to go there with the Duck Dynasty guy is a living religious prophet documentary. But, you know, if you are looking for an emotional punch to get your message through in your documentary, shocking people by showing them actual murders, that's one way to achieve it. And that's what the filmmaker has chosen to do in the one about the Duck Dynasty guy. The same movie producer also created a film called The Undefeated, and that is an unlikely title for a movie about Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. The Undefeated was, in fact, made right after she was defeated in her effort to become vice president of the United States, followed shortly thereafter by her quitting her day job as the not quite one-term governor of Alaska. But the man who produced the Sarah Palin movie and called it The Undefeated, he's the same guy who produced the Phil Robertson is a prophet and here's snuff film footage to prove it movie. He's the same guy who created the Val Kilmer mad scientist global warming movie with all the people in bathing suits in the steam room. And that guy really did just get a gigantic promotion. Interesting career. Before his Hollywood days, he also had his own minor mad scientist moment when, for a time, he took over the management of something called Biosphere 2, which you might remember from the 90s. Biosphere 2 was basically a human terrarium set up in the Arizona desert where people pretended for months on end that they were on Mars, as you do. During his time running that operation, when it was reportedly losing about $1 million a month, Biosphere 2, our hero admitted in a lawsuit filed against him at the time that indeed he had called one of the Biosphere 2 residents a bimbo, and he had told her to her face that when it came to her safety concerns about the project, he told her he would, quote, ram them down your effing throat. although he didn't say effing. So it sounds like that was a nice work environment that he created when he was running the Biosphere 2 project. The allegations from that lawsuit and what he admitted to saying to the person who was working for him in that lawsuit, that took on a darker tone a couple years later in 1996 when a woman who was his wife at the time called police on New Year's Day in Los Angeles and claimed that he had attacked her. His wife told the responding officers that he had grabbed her both by the wrist and by the neck. According to the police report, she told the responding officers that she ran away from him and into their home to try to call police. She told the officers he chased her into the house after she had dialed 911. He grabbed the phone out of her hand, threw it across the room, and shattered it. In fact, the police report says the department only responded to that call as a silent 911 call. They could tell somebody had dialed 911, but they couldn't tell for what reason, because in fact, when the police turned up, the phone was shattered and in pieces. The police report says the officers did observe red marks around the woman's neck and red marks on her wrist. And prosecutors did file domestic violence and battery charges against him. They also charged him with seeking to prevent a crime victim or witness from reporting that crime to authorities. That ends up being a really key part of this because there was an arraignment. The man was brought up on these charges in March 1996. He pled not guilty to all the charges. But his wife claimed in court documents that her husband had threatened her specifically and threatened repercussions against their kids if she showed up in court to testify against him on those charges. So the police report, she called 911, the police showed up, the police documented what they documented about those charges. Prosecutors chose to bring charges against him, including him trying to intimidate his wife, a witness, into not being able to pursue those charges. And his wife says, after the charges were filed, in fact, he threatened their kids if she showed up in court for when he was going to face trial. And in fact, when his court date came up for him to face trial, his wife mysteriously could not be located. She did not appear at the trial. And so, without the witness there, without her able to testify as a witness, prosecutors had no choice but to drop those charges. And that's how that case went away. Over the following decade, he and his wife continued to tangle over money and child custody and ultimately divorce. In court filings related to the divorce in 2007, his wife said one of the reasons they had a hard time agreeing where their daughter should go to school is because he felt like too many Los Angeles area private schools just had too many Jews in them. She described him asking the director of one Los Angeles area prep school, quote, why there were so many Hanukkah books in the library. Another school was allegedly not to his liking because it, quote, used to be a temple, meaning a Jewish temple. The couple did ultimately decide on a middle school and high school for their daughters, but only over his alleged complaints that, quote, the biggest problem he had with that school was the number of Jews that attend. He says that he doesn't like Jews, and he doesn't like the way they raise their kids to be whiny brats, and he doesn't want the girls going to school with Jews. And that is the guy who Donald Trump has now named to be his chief strategist and senior counselor in the White House. His name is Steve Bannon. We have reported on him extensively on this show ever since Donald Trump named him to be campaign CEO earlier this year. Part of the reason we have focused on him is because Trump hiring somebody like that for any job on the campaign, let alone the top one, sort of begged the question as to whether or not the Trump campaign was running background checks on the people they were hiring. Now that he's not just working on the campaign, now he's going to be in the Oval Office, serving in a position that the Trump folks are describing as equal to the White House Chief of Staff. Now I really want to know if they're doing background checks. This summer at the Republican National Convention, Steve Bannon told reporter Sarah Posner at Mother Jones that at his old job, running a website called Breitbart.com, he had created, quote, the platform for the alt-right. Alt-right is, of course, a euphemistic term that has not been around very long. Breitbart.com, interestingly, under Steve Bannon, they ran a long, sympathetic profile/explainer last year where they described the constituent parts of the alt-right movement and its leading thinkers. Again, Steve Bannon describes his own website, describes Breitbart.com as the platform for the alt-right. In their explainer about what the alt-right is, the Breitbart website describes this guy with the trendy haircut as the, quote, center of alt-right thought. This is a man named Richard Spencer, who we've also covered a number of times on this show. Richard Spencer and other leading lights of the alt-right movement, they held their own press conference in September in Washington, D.C. to clarify for everybody what the alt-right is and what they stand for. Steve Bannon at Breitbart.com had given the alt-right all of this new publicity, all of this, the attendant attention that comes with having somebody who represents you, who says they run the platform for the alt-right, having them operating at such a high level of national politics. Right, Steve Bannon, new senior counselor to the president-elect, describes himself as having created the online platform for the alt-right. So that platform, his publication describes Richard Spencer as the center of alt-right thought. Richard Spencer freely admits that his goal as the center of of alt-right thought, his goal is to create a whites-only homeland in the United States.
Richard is probably the most radical of any of the three of us here. Is he just simply wants a white homeland, a white identity?
A lot of mainstream publications today are having a hard time coming up with the right way to describe who's going to be this Karl Rove figure in the Trump White House, this senior counselor who President-elect Trump has named to be his top advisor. And again, they're being explicit, equal in status with the White House chief of staff. You can sort of viscerally feel the discomfort in the Beltway media, referring to him as a white nationalist or a person who comes from the white nationalist corner of conservative media and conservative propaganda. But that really is true. That is documented. That is, in his own terms, the way he has characterized his own work up until the point where he left it to go run the Trump campaign. Or did he leave that work to go run the Trump campaign? We don't actually know that. Steve Bannon has disclosed none of his financial information either, much like President-elect Trump himself. We don't know if Steve Bannon still has ties to the white nationalist alt-right platform that he created at Breitbart.com. Will he keep running that media outlet? Or will he keep a financial interest in that media outlet while also running the Oval Office? Can you do that?